The phone buzzed against Carl Cooper's chest where it lay on his sweater, and he knew without looking that it would be Jonathan Jackson calling again. The third time today, the fifth time this week. Each call lasting longer than the last, each goodbye stretched thin like taffy until neither of them wanted to be the first to hang up. Carl pressed the phone to his ear and felt that familiar flutter in his stomach. The one that had been growing stronger with every conversation, every text that came at odd hours, every time Jonathan's voice went soft and uncertain in ways it never used to. "Hey," Jonathan said, and there was something different in his voice tonight, something that made Carl sit up straighter on his couch. "Hey yourself, you sound weird. Good weird or bad weird?" There was a pause, the kind that felt loaded with things Jonathan wanted to say, but couldn't quite find the words for. "I don't know yet. Can I come over?" Carl's heart did that stuttering thing it had been doing lately whenever Jonathan asked to spend time together. "Of course. You know you don't have to ask. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went quiet, but neither of them hung up. Carl could hear Jonathan's breathing, could picture him standing in his apartment, probably running his hand through his dark hair the way he did when he was nervous about something. "Jonathan?" "Yeah? You sure you're okay?" Another pause. "I think I'm about to be." The call ended, leaving Carl staring at his phone screen, trying to decode the weight in Jonathan's words. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. Because something was definitely ending tonight, or beginning, and Carl wasn't sure which possibility scared him more. He'd been in love with Jonathan Jackson for 2 years and 4 months. Not that he was counting, except he absolutely was counting, marking each day that passed where he played the role of best friend while his heart quietly broke and mended and broke again every time Jonathan called to complain about another failed date, another relationship that left him feeling empty. "She's perfect on paper," Jonathan had said just last week, talking about Emma Martin, the marketing executive he'd been seeing for 3 months. "Smart, funny, gorgeous, everything I should want." "Should want?" Carl had asked, even though the words felt like swallowing glass. "I don't know, there's something missing." There's always something missing. Carl had made the appropriate supportive friend noises, had offered advice about communication and patience, all while wanting to scream that maybe what was missing wasn't something Jonathan could find in any of the women he dated. Maybe what was missing was sitting right there on the other end of the phone, had been there all along, waiting. But Carl had never said that, had never even hinted at it. Because Jonathan Jackson was straight, had always been straight, and Carl had accepted long ago that his feelings were a burden he'd carry alone rather than risk losing the friendship that meant everything to him. Except lately things had been different. It started small. Jonathan calling more often, their conversations stretching longer. Where they used to talk maybe twice a week, now it was daily, sometimes twice daily. Jonathan would call on his lunch break, call on his drive home from work, call late at night when he couldn't sleep. "I was just thinking about you," he'd say, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The conversations had shifted too. Less about Jonathan's dating life, more about deeper things, philosophy and dreams, and the kind of vulnerable late-night thoughts that people usually kept to themselves. Jonathan would ask Carl's opinion on everything from career moves to whether he thought it was possible to love someone and not know it until years later. Hypothetically, Jonathan had said during one of their marathon phone calls, "Do you think people can suppress feelings without realizing it? Like convince themselves they feel one way when they actually feel something completely different?" Carl's heart had nearly stopped. "I think people are capable of lying to themselves about almost anything if the truth feels too scary to face." "Yeah," Jonathan had said quietly. "Yeah, I think so too." Then there were the physical changes when they were together. Jonathan had always been affectionate in a casual, friendly way, but lately the hugs lasted longer. He'd sit closer on the couch during their movie nights, close enough that their shoulders touched and stayed touching. He'd find excuses to make contact, brushing Carl's hand when he passed him a drink, letting his fingers linger when they both reached for the popcorn. Last weekend, Jonathan had fallen asleep during a movie, his head dropping onto Carl's shoulder. Carl had sat frozen for 2 hours, afraid to move and wake him, treasuring every minute of the weight and warmth of Jonathan's body against his. When Jonathan finally stirred, he looked up at Carl with sleepy eyes and smiled. Sorry, you're just really comfortable. It's fine, Carl had managed, though his voice came out rougher than intended. Jonathan had studied his face for a long moment, something searching in his expression. Carl? Yeah? But Jonathan had just shaken his head and pulled away. Never mind. Now Carl paced his apartment, straightening cushions that didn't need straightening, checking his reflection in windows, trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building for weeks. Something was coming. He could feel it in the way Jonathan looked at him sometimes, in the questions he asked, in the way he seemed to be working up the courage to say something important. The knock on his door came exactly 20 minutes later, and Carl's hands were actually shaking as he opened it. Jonathan stood in the hallway looking like he'd been running, his hands through his hair for the entire drive over. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his button-down shirt wrinkled, his eyes bright with something that looked like fear and excitement mixed together. Hey, Carl said softly. Hey. Jonathan stepped inside, then immediately turned to face Carl, like he couldn't wait another second. I need to tell you something. Carl's heart hammered against his ribs. Okay. I broke up with Emma. Oh. Carl tried to look appropriately sympathetic rather than secretly thrilled. I'm sorry, what happened? Jonathan laughed, but it came out shaky. That's the thing. Nothing happened. She's still perfect on paper, still everything I should want. But I was sitting across from her at dinner tonight, listening to her talk about her day, and all I could think about was how much I wished I was talking to you instead. Carl's breath caught. Jonathan? And not just tonight. For weeks now, maybe months. Every time I'm with her, I'm thinking about you. Every time she touches me, I'm wondering what it would feel like if it was your hands instead. Every time we're together, I feel like I'm playing a role, pretending to be someone I'm not. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Carl felt like the world had tilted on its axis, like everything he thought he knew was shifting into a new configuration. What are you saying? Carl asked, though his heart was already racing with hope and terror in equal measure. Jonathan stepped closer, close enough that Carl could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something else, something nervous and electric. I'm saying I think I've been lying to myself for a really long time. I'm saying that when I imagine my future, when I think about who I want to come home to, who I want to share my life with, it's not Emma. It's not any of the women I've dated. It's you, Carl. It's always been you. Carl felt like he couldn't breathe. Jonathan, you're straight. You've always been straight. Have I? Jonathan's voice was barely above a whisper. Or have I just been telling myself that because it was easier than admitting the truth? Because the truth is terrifying and complicated and would change everything? He reached out, his fingers barely brushing Carl's hand. The contact sent electricity shooting up Carl's arm. I've been thinking about this for weeks, driving myself crazy trying to understand what's been happening to me, why I can't stop calling you, why every conversation we have feels more important than anything else in my day, why I keep finding excuses to touch you, to be near you, why I fell asleep on your shoulder last weekend, and it felt more right than anything I've ever experienced with any woman. Carl's eyes were burning. Jonathan, I know this is crazy. I know this changes everything between us. But I can't pretend anymore, Carl. I can't keep lying to myself and to you about what I'm feeling. The silence stretched between them, loaded with 2 years and 4 months of hidden feelings, of careful friendship, of love that had been buried so deep Carl had almost convinced himself it wasn't real. How long? Carl asked finally. How long what? How long have you been feeling this way? Jonathan's laugh was shaky. I don't know, maybe forever? Maybe it just took me this long to be brave enough to recognize it. But I know that every relationship I've had, I've been measuring against what I have with you. The way you listen to me, the way you understand me, the way being with you feels like coming home. And they all came up short, Carl. Every single one of them. Carl felt tears threatening. Do you have any idea what you're saying to me right now? I'm saying I'm in love with you. Jonathan's voice broke on the words. I'm saying I think I've been in love with you for longer than I want to admit, and I was too scared and too stupid to see it. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither had been sure they were ready to cross. Carl stared at Jonathan's face, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear, the hope. I've been in love with you for 2 years and 4 months, Carl said quietly. Jonathan's eyes widened. What? 2 years and 4 months. Since that night you called me crying because your dad was in the hospital, and I drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to be with you. Since you fell asleep holding my hand in that uncomfortable hospital chair, and I realized I would drive through 1,000 snowstorms if it meant being there for you. Carl, Jonathan's voice was wonder and pain mixed together. Every time you called me to talk about another woman, it felt like a knife turning in my chest. Every time you asked my advice about your relationships, I wanted to tell you that maybe you were looking in the wrong place. But I was so scared of losing you, so convinced you could never feel the same way. They were standing so close now that Carl could feel the warmth radiating from Jonathan's body. Jonathan's hand came up to cup Carl's face, his thumb brushing across his cheekbone. I'm sorry, Jonathan whispered. I'm so sorry I put you through that. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure this out. Are you sure? Carl asked, leaning into the touch. Are you sure this isn't just confusion or curiosity or... Carl, Jonathan's other hand came up to frame his face. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are not confusion or curiosity. You are the person I want to wake up next to every morning. You are the person I want to tell about my day, good or bad. You are the person I want to build a life with. Carl's heart felt like it might explode from his chest. Jonathan, can I kiss you? Jonathan asked, his voice barely audible. Please, Carl, I need to kiss you. Instead of answering, Carl closed the distance between them, pressing his lips to Jonathan's in a kiss that felt like coming alive after years of holding his breath. Jonathan made a soft sound against his mouth, his hands tightening on Carl's face as he kissed back and with a desperation that spoke of months of suppressed longing. The kiss deepened and became more urgent, more certain. Carl's hands fisted in Jonathan's shirt, pulling him closer, and Jonathan responded by pressing him back against the wall, their bodies flushed together from chest to hip. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jonathan rested his forehead against Carl's. Wow, Jonathan breathed. Yeah, Carl agreed, his voice rough. Wow. They stood there for a moment, foreheads touching, sharing breath and space in the overwhelming reality of what had just happened. I'm scared, Jonathan admitted quietly. Me too, Carl said. But good scared or bad scared? Jonathan smiled, the expression transforming his whole face. Good scared, definitely good scared. Carl reached up to smooth down Jonathan's disheveled hair. So what happens now? Now we figure it out, Jonathan said. Together, one day at a time. What about Emma? Already handled. I told her I needed to be honest with both of us about what I really wanted. She was hurt, but she said she'd been feeling like I wasn't fully present anyway. Turns out she was right. Carl nodded, relief flooding through him. And us? Us, Jonathan repeated, like he was tasting the word. I like the sound of that. He leaned in to kiss Carl again, softer this time, more exploratory. Carl melted into it, into the impossible reality that Jonathan Jackson was kissing him, was choosing him, was looking at him like he was the answer to questions Jonathan hadn't even known he was asking. When they broke apart this time, Jonathan took Carl's hand and led him to the couch. They settled into the cushions, Jonathan pulling Carl against his side in a way that felt both new and utterly familiar. I have about 1,000,000 questions, Carl said, his head on Jonathan's shoulder. Ask me anything. When did you first start questioning, like really questioning? Jonathan was quiet for a moment, his fingers playing with Carl's hair. Remember that night about 2 months ago when we were watching that movie, and there was that scene where the guy realizes he's been in love with his best friend the whole time? Carl remembered. They'd both gone very quiet during that scene, the tension in the room thick enough to cut. I remember. You made some comment about how obvious it was, how the signs had been there all along, and I started thinking about signs. about all the things I'd been ignoring or explaining away. The way I looked forward to your calls more than dates with Emma. The way I felt more comfortable being myself with you than with anyone else. The way I kept comparing every woman I dated to you and finding them lacking. Carl tilted his head to look up at Jonathan. And that scared you. Terrified me, Jonathan admitted, because it meant everything I thought I knew about myself might be wrong. It meant I might have been wasting years looking for something I already had right in front of me. What changed? What made you decide to tell me tonight? Jonathan's hands stilled in Carl's hair. Emma asked me to move in with her. Carl's heart clenched. Oh, and I panicked, not because I didn't want to live with someone, but because the idea of living with her felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. But when I imagined living with you, sharing a space with you, falling asleep next to you every night, he trailed off, his voice getting rough. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Carl sat up to face him properly. Jonathan, I know it's a lot. I know this changes everything and we'll have to figure out how to navigate it all. Coming out, telling our families and friends, dealing with people who might not understand. But Carl, I can't go back to pretending. I can't go back to dating women and wondering why it never feels right when I know exactly why. Carl reached for Jonathan's hands, intertwining their fingers. We'll figure it out. All of it. Together. You're not freaked out by any of this? Carl laughed, the sound a little watery. Jonathan, I've been dreaming about this moment for over 2 years. I'm not freaked out. I'm overwhelmed and happy and scared and about 50 other emotions, but freaked out isn't one of them. Jonathan squeezed his hands. I love you, Carl. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it, but I love you. I love you too, Carl replied. And the words felt like a prayer, like a promise, like everything he'd been holding back finally finding its voice. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the newness of it, the permission to touch and be touched, to love openly instead of hiding. When they finally settled back into the couch, Carl curled against Jonathan's side. Jonathan spoke again. I keep thinking about all the time we wasted, he said quietly. We didn't waste it, Carl said firmly. We needed that time. You needed that time to figure yourself out, and I needed that time to learn how to be your friend without expecting anything in return. If this had happened sooner, we might not have been ready for it. Jonathan pressed a kiss to the top of Carl's head. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between the 100th time you called me for dating advice and the 1,000th time I wanted to tell you the answer was sitting right there with you. They talked until nearly 3 in the morning, filling in the gaps, sharing the moments when they'd almost said something, the times they'd caught each other staring, the careful dance they'd been doing around their feelings without even realizing it. Stay tonight? Carl asked when Jonathan finally started to gather himself to leave. Jonathan's eyes searched his face. Are you sure? I'm sure. We don't have to do anything, except sleep. I don't want you to leave. I've spent too many nights wishing you were here. Jonathan's smile was soft and full of love. Okay, yeah, I'd like that. They got ready for bed with a domestic ease that felt both new and ancient, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Carl lent Jonathan pajamas, and they brushed their teeth side by side at the bathroom sink, catching each other's eyes in the mirror and grinning like teenagers. In bed, they lay facing each other in the dark, hands clasped between them on the pillow. This feels like a dream, Jonathan whispered. A good dream. The best dream. The kind I didn't even know I was allowed to have. Carl brought Jonathan's hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to his knuckles. You're allowed to have this, Jonathan. We both are. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to feel wrong or scary or like a mistake. Does it? No, Jonathan said immediately. It feels like the first thing I've done in years that's completely right. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, foreheads nearly touching, breathing in sync. Carl woke once in the middle of the night to find Jonathan's arm around him, holding him close even in sleep. And the contentment that washed over him was so profound he nearly cried. When morning came, Carl woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jonathan moving around in his kitchen. For a moment he lay still, letting the reality of it wash over him. Jonathan Jackson was in his kitchen making coffee, Jonathan Jackson had spent the night in his bed. Jonathan Jackson was in love with him. Carl found Jonathan standing at the counter in borrowed pajamas, hair sticking up at odd angles, looking more beautiful than Carl had ever seen him. "Morning," Carl said softly. Jonathan turned and his whole face lit up. "Morning. I hope you don't mind. I made coffee, and I was going to attempt breakfast, but I wasn't sure what you had." "Coffee's perfect," Carl said, accepting the mug Jonathan handed him. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and even that small contact sent warmth shooting through him. They stood there in the morning light, drinking coffee and looking at each other like they were seeing each other for the first time. "Any regrets?" Carl asked, because he had to know, had to be sure. "Only that we waited so long," Jonathan said immediately. "You?" "Same." Jonathan set down his coffee and then moved closer, sliding his arms around Carl's waist. "So what do you want to do today?" "I want to do everything," Carl said, setting his own mug aside so he could wrap his arms around Jonathan's neck. "I want to go grocery shopping together and argue about what to make for lunch. I want to sit on the couch and watch terrible movies and not have to worry about sitting too close. I want to hold your hand and kiss you whenever I feel like it and not have to hide how I feel about you." Jonathan's smile was radiant. "That sounds perfect." "I want to call you mine," Carl added quietly. "I am yours," Jonathan said, leaning down to brush his lips against Carl's. "I think I always have been. I just needed to figure it out." They kissed in the morning light streaming through Carl's kitchen window, and it tasted like coffee and new beginnings and all the tomorrows they'd have together. Later, as they got dressed and prepared to face the world as something new, something more than they'd been the day before, Carl caught Jonathan looking at himself in the mirror with an expression of wonder. "What?" Carl asked, coming up behind him. "I look different," Jonathan said, "like something fundamental has changed." Carl studied Jonathan's reflection, seeing the same handsome face he'd been in love with for over 2 years. But Jonathan was right. There was something different, a lightness around his eyes, a relaxation in his shoulders, like he'd been carrying a weight he hadn't even realized was there. "You look happy," Carl said. "I am happy. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Carl kissed his shoulder through his shirt. "Good, because I plan on keeping you happy for a very long time." "Promise?" "Promise." They spent the day doing exactly what Carl had wanted. They went grocery shopping, Jonathan's hand warm in his as they debated the merits of different pasta shapes. They cooked lunch together, Jonathan stealing kisses, while Carl tried to focus on not burning the garlic. They curled up on the couch afterward, Jonathan's head in Carl's lap, while Carl ran his fingers through his hair, and they half-watched a movie neither of them cared about. "I should probably call my sister," Jonathan said during a commercial break. "Let her know about Emma." "What will you tell her about us?" Jonathan tilted his head to look up at him. "The truth, that I figured out I'm in love with my best friend and he loves me back, that I'm happier than I've ever been." Carl's heart swelled. "She'll probably say she saw it coming." "Probably. Lisa Smith always was too perceptive for her own good." They talked about the practical things too, how to tell their friends and families, how to navigate Jonathan's newfound understanding of his sexuality, how to blend their lives together in all the ways they'd been unconsciously keeping separate. "I want to take this slow," Jonathan said at one point. "Not because I'm not sure about you, but because I want to do this right. I want to be the partner you deserve." "You already are," Carl said softly. "You've been the most important person in my life for years, Jonathan. The only thing that's changed is that now I get to tell you how much I love you." As evening approached, they ordered takeout and ate it sitting on the floor of Carl's living room, backs against the couch, talking about everything and nothing. Jonathan told Carl about the moment he had realized he was attracted to men, how it had felt like a door opening in his mind that he hadn't even known was there. "It was actually when you were getting dressed after we went swimming last month," Jonathan admitted, his cheeks flushing. "I caught myself staring and had this moment of panic like, why am I looking at Carl like that? And then I realized I've been looking at you like that for a while. I'd just been very good at not admitting it to myself." Carl nearly choked on his noodles. "That's what did it? Me in swim trunks?" You have no idea how attractive you are, do you? Jonathan asked, shaking his head. Carl, I've been half in love with you for months without even realizing it. Every time you smiled at me, every time you laughed at my jokes, every time you just existed in my space, you were slowly but surely ruining me for anyone else. Good, Carl said, leaning over to kiss him. I like being the one who ruins you for other people. As the night wore on, they found themselves back on the couch, this time with Carl lying with his head on Jonathan's chest, listening to his heartbeat. I keep thinking about that phone call earlier, Carl said, when you said you thought you were about to be okay. Hmm? Were you okay, I mean? Jonathan's hand stilled in Carl's hair. More than okay. Carl, for the first time in my adult life, I feel like I know who I am. Like all the pieces of myself finally make sense. Carl tilted his head to look at him. No more pretending to be someone you're not. No more pretending, Jonathan confirmed. No more dating women and wondering why it feels like I'm going through the motions. No more feeling like something essential is missing from my life. And no more me pretending to be just your friend when I want to be so much more. Definitely no more of that, Jonathan said, leaning down to kiss him. Though you'll always be my best friend too. That doesn't change. It just gets better, Carl said. So much better. They fell asleep on the couch that night, wrapped around each other, the TV playing softly in the background. Carl woke up first, sometime before dawn, and lay still for a moment, marveling at the weight of Jonathan's arm around him, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the reality that this was his life now. 3 weeks later, Carl woke up to Jonathan singing in the shower, his voice echoing off the bathroom tiles in a way that made Carl smile before he was even fully conscious. They'd fallen into a rhythm so natural it felt like they'd been living together for years instead of weeks. Jonathan had officially moved in the weekend before, after spending every night at Carl's place anyway. I'm paying rent on an apartment I never sleep in, he'd said, laughing. This is ridiculous. So move in, Carl had replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Move in properly. Bring your books and your terrible taste in breakfast cereal and that lamp you love that I pretend to hate. You hate my lamp? I love your lamp because you love your lamp. But objectively, it's hideous. Jonathan had kissed him then, long and thorough. I love you. I love you too, even if you have questionable taste in lighting. Now Carl padded to the kitchen in his pajamas, starting the coffee maker and pulling eggs from the refrigerator. Jonathan appeared a few minutes later, hair damp from the shower, wearing one of Carl's sweaters that was slightly too big on him. Morning, beautiful, Jonathan said, sliding his arms around Carl's waist from behind and nuzzling his neck. Morning yourself, Carl replied, leaning back against Jonathan's chest. Sleep well? Always do when I'm with you. It was such a simple statement, but it made Carl's heart flutter the way Jonathan's words still did, even after weeks of waking up together, of good morning kisses and shared coffee and the domestic bliss of building a life together. They told Jonathan's sister Lisa the day after their first night together. She'd listened to Jonathan's halting explanation over the phone, his nervous confession that he was in love with Carl, that he thought he might not be as straight as he'd always believed. Jonathan, she'd said when he finally ran out of words, I've been waiting for you to figure this out for literally years. What? Honey, you've been in love with Carl since college. You just couldn't see it because you were so convinced you had to be straight. I'm not surprised you figured it out. I'm surprised it took you this long. Jonathan had looked at Carl with wide ears, mouthing she knew, while Carl tried not to laugh. Are you happy? Lisa had asked. Happier than I've ever been in my life. Then I'm happy for you, both of you. Carl's good for you, Jonathan. He always has been. Telling Jonathan's parents had been more complicated, but even they had come around quickly once they saw how happy Jonathan was. His mother had cried, but they were good tears, she insisted. Tears of relief that her son had finally found someone who loved him the way he deserved to be loved. Carl's parents had been thrilled. His mother had actually said, finally, when Carl called to tell them, which had made both Carl and Jonathan laugh until they cried. Your mom knew too? Jonathan had asked afterward. Apparently everyone knew except us, Carl had replied. Now, 3 weeks into their new life together, They were settling into patterns that felt as natural as breathing. Jonathan made coffee in the mornings while Carl cooked breakfast. They took turns doing dishes and laundry. They'd claimed different sides of the bed and different spots on the couch, but they always ended up gravitating toward each other anyway. The physical intimacy had developed slowly, carefully, both of them wanting to savor each new step. They'd spent hours just kissing, learning each other's mouths, discovering what made the other gasp or sigh or pull them closer. Jonathan was endlessly fascinated by the way Carl responded to his touch, as if he was cataloging every reaction, every sensitive spot, every way to make Carl's breath hitch. "I can't believe I get to do this," Jonathan had whispered one night, his lips trailing down Carl's neck. "I can't believe I get to touch you like this." "You can touch me however you want," Carl had replied, his voice rough with want. "I'm yours, Jonathan. Completely yours." They hadn't rushed into anything, both of them wanting to build their physical relationship on the solid foundation of love and trust they'd already established. But every kiss, every caress, every night they fell asleep wrapped around each other felt like a small miracle to Carl. This morning was no different. Jonathan's arms around him as he cooked eggs felt like the most natural thing in the world, like this was exactly where they were both meant to be. "What's the plan for today?" Jonathan asked, pressing a kiss to Carl's temple. "I was thinking we could go to that farmer's market you mentioned, maybe walk around the park afterward." "Sounds perfect. I love that we can just do normal couple things now." "As opposed to the abnormal couple things we were doing before?" Jonathan laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest into Carl's back. "You know what I mean. I love that I can hold your hand in public. I love that I can introduce you as my boyfriend. I love that I don't have to pretend anymore." Carl turned in Jonathan's arms to face him. "I love all of that too." They kissed, soft and unhurried, the kind of kiss that spoke of lazy Saturday mornings and all the time in the world. When they broke apart, Jonathan rested his forehead against Carl's. "I have something to tell you," Jonathan said. Carl's heart skipped. "Good something or bad something?" "Good something, great something, actually." Jonathan's smile was radiant. "I got a call yesterday from that publishing house I interviewed with last month. They want to offer me the position." Carl's face lit up. "Jonathan, that's amazing. That's your dream job." "It is," Jonathan agreed, "and I wanted to make sure you were okay with it before I accepted." "Why wouldn't I be okay with it?" "Because it means I'll be traveling more. A few days a month, sometimes a week at a time. And I know we're still figuring this out, and I don't want you to think I'm not committed to us." Carl cupped Jonathan's face in his hands. "Jonathan Jackson, I have been in love with you for over 2 years. I'm not going anywhere because you have to travel for work sometimes. I'm proud of you. This is what you've wanted for years." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Besides, it'll make coming home to me even sweeter, won't it?" Jonathan's smile could have powered the entire city. "God, I love you." "I love you too. Now call them back and accept that job before they change their minds." They spent the morning at the farmer's market, Jonathan's hand warm in Carl's as they wandered between stalls, sampling cheese and buying flowers, and acting like the couple they'd always been in their hearts but could finally be in public. Jonathan bought Carl sunflowers, his favorite, and Carl bought Jonathan the ridiculously expensive honey he loved but never bought for himself. "We're disgustingly domestic," Carl observed as they walked back to the car, arms full of groceries and flowers. "I know," Jonathan said happily. "I love it. I never thought I'd be the type of person who got excited about farmers, markets, and matching coffee mugs. But here we are." "We don't have matching coffee mugs." "We should get matching coffee mugs." Carl laughed. "Okay, but I get to pick them out." "Deal." That afternoon, they spread a blanket in the park and lay in the sunshine, Carl's head on Jonathan's chest, both of them reading different books, but sharing the same space, the same contentment. "Carl," Jonathan said after a while, "Hmm? Do you ever think about the future, like our future together?" Carl set his book aside and then looked it up at Jonathan. "All the time. Why?" "I just keep having these moments where I imagine us 5 years from now, 10 years from now, maybe living in a house with a garden you can fuss over, maybe traveling together, seeing the world. Maybe he trailed off, his cheeks flushing slightly. Maybe what? Maybe married, Jonathan finished quietly. Is that crazy? We've only been together for 3 weeks. Carl's heart did that fluttering thing again. We've been together for much longer than 3 weeks, Jonathan. We've been building toward this for years. The only thing that's changed is that now we're both aware of it. So it's not crazy? It's not crazy, Carl confirmed, leaning up to kiss him. I think about our future too. I think about growing old with you, about building a life that's completely ours. I want that, Jonathan said softly. I want all of it, with you. Then we'll have it, Carl said simply, all of it. They lay there in the sunshine, talking about dreams and possibilities, about the life they wanted to build together. Other couples walked by, families with children, elderly pairs holding hands, and Carl felt a profound sense of belonging, of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be. As the sun started to set, they packed up their blanket and headed home, stopping to pick up ingredients for dinner. In the grocery store, Jonathan grabbed Carl's hand as they walked down the pasta aisle, swinging their joined hands between them like teenagers. I still can't believe this is real sometimes, Jonathan said. What part? All of it. Being with you, being happy, feeling like myself for the first time in my adult life. Carl squeezed his hand. It's real. We're real. I know, it's just, I spent so many years feeling like I was missing something, like there was this essential part of life that everyone else understood, but I didn't. And it turns out what I was missing was you, Carl Bano. Stopped walking and turned to face Jonathan fully, right there in the middle of the grocery store. Jonathan, I love you, Jonathan said simply. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. But it's a good scared, the kind that means something matters. I love you too, Carl replied, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. They kissed right there between the pasta and the rice, and Carl didn't care who saw them, didn't care about anything except the man in his arms and the life they were building together. That night, as they cooked dinner together in their kitchen, Jonathan's new job offer accepted, and their future stretching out bright and full of possibility ahead of them, Carl caught Jonathan humming while he chopped vegetables. You're happy, Carl observed. I'm happy, Jonathan confirmed. Are you? Carl looked around their kitchen, at the sunflowers on the counter, at Jonathan in his borrowed sweater, with his hair falling into his eyes as he concentrated on his knife work, at the life they'd built in just 3 weeks that felt more real and right than anything Carl had ever experienced. I'm happy, he said. I'm exactly where I want to be. Jonathan looked up from the vegetables and smiled, the expression transforming his whole face. Then we're both exactly where we need to be. Later that evening, as they sat on the couch with Jonathan's head in Carl's lap, watching a movie they'd both seen a dozen times, Carl's phone buzzed with a text from his best friend, Peter Roberts. You two are disgusting, the message read, attached to a photo Peter had apparently taken of them at the farmer's market that morning, Jonathan feeding Carl a strawberry while they both laughed. Carl showed the text to Jonathan, who grinned. Disgusting in a good way or bad way? Definitely good way. Peter's been waiting for this almost as long as I have. Everyone really did know except us, didn't they? Apparently. Carl set his phone aside and ran his fingers through Jonathan's hair. Does that bother you? No, Jonathan said after thinking about it. It actually makes me feel better, knowing that other people could see what we couldn't. Like it was always meant to happen, we just needed time to catch up to what everyone else already knew. I like that, Carl said softly. The idea that we were always heading toward this moment, even when we didn't know it. All those phone calls that got longer and longer, Jonathan mused. All those times I found excuses to touch you or be near you. All those relationships that never felt quite right because I was measuring them against what I had with you. All those times I wanted to tell you how I felt but convinced myself I was imagining the way you looked at me sometimes. You weren't imagining it, Jonathan said, turning to look up at Carl. I was looking at you like that. I just didn't understand what it meant yet. Carl leaned down to kiss him, soft and sweet. I'm glad you figured it out. Me too. Best decision I ever made, telling you how I felt. even though you were terrified, especially because I was terrified. The best things in life are usually the scariest to reach for. They finished the movie in comfortable silence, Jonathan's weight warm and solid against Carl's legs, both of them lost in their own thoughts about how they'd gotten here, about all the small moments and choices that had led them to this couch, this evening, this life together. When the credits rolled, Jonathan sat up and stretched, then turned to face Carl with a serious expression. "I want to ask you something," he said. Carl's heart skipped, the way it still did whenever Jonathan looked at him with that particular intensity. "Okay, I know it's early, and I know we're still figuring things out, but—" Jonathan took a deep breath. "I want to know if you'd consider moving somewhere new with me. Not right away, but maybe in a year or two. I've been thinking about how much of my life I spent trying to be someone I wasn't, living in places and situations that never quite fit. And now that I know who I am, now that I have you, I want to start fresh somewhere. Build something that's entirely ours." Carl studied Jonathan's face, seeing the hope and vulnerability there, the way he was trying to look casual about something that clearly meant a lot to him. "Where were you thinking?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere with better weather, maybe. Somewhere we could have a garden and space to breathe. Somewhere we could just be ourselves without any history or expectations." Carl reached for Jonathan's hands. "I think that sounds perfect." "Really?" "Really, I'd follow you anywhere, Jonathan. As long as we're together, I don't care where we live." Jonathan's smile was radiant. "I love you so much." "I love you too. Besides, the idea of starting completely fresh, somewhere new, just the two of us, sounds like exactly the kind of adventure I want to have with you." They talked late into the night about possibilities, about cities they'd always wanted to visit, about the kind of life they wanted to build together. Jonathan pulled up real estate websites on his laptop, and they scrolled through pictures of houses with big windows and gardens, laughing at the ridiculously expensive ones and bookmarking the ones that made them both say, "Oh, that's nice." "Look at this one," Carl said, pointing to a photo of a small house with a wraparound porch and mature trees in the yard. "It's in North Carolina. But look at that kitchen." "And the porch," Jonathan said. "We could have coffee out there in the mornings. You could write out there when the weather's nice. You could read out there in the evenings." They looked at each other and grinned. "We're really doing this, aren't we, Carl?" Carl said. "Planning our future together?" "Yeah, we are." "I never thought I'd get to do this," Carl admitted. "Plan a future with someone I love. Pick out houses and talk about gardens and coffee on porches. It feels too good to be true sometimes." Jonathan closed the laptop and pulled Carl into his arms. "It's not too good to be true. It's just what we deserve, what we've always deserved. I spent so long convincing myself I'd be happy with just being your friend, that loving you from a distance would be enough. And I spent so long not even recognizing what I was feeling, let alone acting on it. We both wasted time being scared of something that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to us." Carl settled against Jonathan's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "No more wasting time." "No more wasting time," Jonathan agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of Carl's head. "From now on, we say what we mean and we go after what we want. What do you want right now?" "Right now, I want to take you to bed and hold you while you fall asleep. I want to wake up tomorrow morning with you in my arms and know that I get to do it again the next day and the day after that." "That sounds perfect," Carl said, tilting his head up to kiss Jonathan's jaw. "Absolutely perfect." They made their way to the bedroom, moving through their nighttime routine with the easy familiarity of people who'd been sharing space and intimacy for longer than the calendar would suggest. Carl watched Jonathan brush his teeth, marveling at how domestic and right it felt to share a bathroom sink, to see Jonathan's toothbrush next to his, to have someone to say goodnight to. In bed, they curled around each other the way they had every night since that first confession. Jonathan's arm around Carl's waist, Carl's head on Jonathan's shoulder, their legs tangled together under the covers. "Jonathan?" Carl said into the darkness. "Hmm? Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to tell me how you felt. For risking everything to be honest with me. For choosing me." Jonathan's arm tightened around him. "Thank you for waiting for me to figure it out. for loving me even when I was too stupid to see what was right in front of me, for making it safe for me to be myself. I'd wait forever for you, Carl said softly. You don't have to wait anymore, Jonathan replied. I'm here. I'm yours, for as long as you'll have me. Forever then. Forever. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, two hearts finally beating in sync, two lives finally aligned in the way they were always meant to be. And if Carl dreamed that night of porches and gardens and growing old with the man he loved, well, those were the kinds of dreams that had a way of coming true. 6 months later, Carl stood in the kitchen of their new house in Asheville, North Carolina, watching through the window as Jonathan sat on their wraparound porch with his laptop, working on the novel he had finally found the courage to start writing. The morning sun caught the highlights in Jonathan's hair, and Carl felt that familiar flutter of love and gratitude. That still caught him off guard sometimes. They'd found the house 3 months ago during a long weekend trip to explore potential places to relocate. It wasn't the exact house they'd bookmarked that first night of dreaming together, but it was close enough to feel like fate. A small craftsman with good bones, a kitchen that needed updating but had potential, and a porch that wrapped around two sides of the house where they could drink coffee in the mornings and wine in the evenings. This is it, Jonathan had said the moment they walked through the front door. This is home. Carl had felt it too, the rightness of the space, the way the light fell through the windows, the way he could already picture their books on the built-in shelves and their lives unfolding in these rooms. The move had been surprisingly easy. They'd both been ready for a fresh start, ready to build something entirely their own without the weight of history or the ghost of who they'd been before they found each other. Jonathan's new job was flexible enough to allow remote work most of the time, and Carl had found a position at a local nonprofit that felt more meaningful than anything he'd done before. Now, 6 months into their new life, Carl couldn't imagine being anywhere else. He'd started a garden in the backyard, something he'd never thought he'd be interested in, but found surprisingly satisfying. Jonathan had claimed the spare bedroom as his office and filled it with books and plants and the terrible lamp Carl had learned to love because Jonathan loved it. They'd settled into rhythms that felt as natural as breathing. Jonathan wrote in the mornings while Carl worked in the garden or read on the porch. They cooked dinner together most evenings, trying new recipes and laughing when they inevitably modified them beyond recognition. They joined a local hiking group and made friends with their neighbors, building a community that felt warm and welcoming and entirely their own. Carl poured 2 cups of coffee and carried them outside, settling into the chair next to Jonathan's. Jonathan looked up from his laptop and smiled, the expression still capable of making Carl's heart skip after all this time. How's the writing going? Carl asked, handing him his coffee. Good, I think. I'm at that stage where I can't tell if it's brilliant or terrible, but I'm getting words on the page. What's it about again? Jonathan's cheeks flushed slightly. It's about two friends who fall in love. One of them takes forever to figure out he's gay, and the other one has to watch him date other people while secretly being in love with him. Carl raised an eyebrow. Sounds familiar. I'm writing what I know, Jonathan said with a grin. Isn't that what they always tell writers to do? And how does it end? They get there happily ever after. They move to a small town and buy a house with a garden and a porch where they can drink coffee in the mornings. I like that ending, Carl said, leaning over to kiss Jonathan's temple. I thought you might. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their coffee and watching the world wake up around them. Their neighbor Nancy Hughes waved from her garden across the street, and Carl waved back, still marveling at how quickly they'd been accepted into this community, how easy it was to be themselves here. I got a call from Peter yesterday, Carl said eventually. He and Jessica Moore are engaged. That's wonderful. When's the wedding? Next spring. He wants you to be a groomsman. Jonathan looked surprised. Really? But he's your friend. He's our friend now, and he said, and I quote, Jonathan's the one who made Carl happy, so he's family as far as I'm concerned. Jonathan's smile was soft and pleased. I'd be honored. Good, because I already told him yes. They talked about the wedding, about travel plans and what gift to buy, about how strange and wonderful it was to be making these kinds of decisions together, to be building a life that included shared friends and shared obligations and shared joy. I have something to tell you, Jonathan said after a while, setting his coffee cup aside. Carl's heart did that little skip it still did whenever Jonathan got that serious tone in his voice. Good something or bad something. Good something, great something. Jonathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Carl's breath caught. Jonathan, I know we said we'd wait until we'd been together longer, but Carl, I can't wait anymore. I've spent enough of my life waiting to be brave enough to go after what I want. And what I want is to spend the rest of my life with you. Officially, legally, in front of everyone we love. Jonathan slid out of his chair and onto one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band that caught the morning light. Carl Cooper, will you marry me? Carl felt tears prick his eyes as he looked down at the man he loved, the man who'd turned his whole world upside down and put it back together in a way that made perfect sense. Yes, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, of course, yes. Jonathan's face lit up as he slipped the ring onto Carl's finger, and then Carl was pulling him up and into his arms, kissing him with all the love and joy and gratitude that filled his heart to overflowing. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Jonathan rested his forehead against Carl's. I love you, he said. I love you so much. I love you too, Carl replied, more than I ever thought possible. They held each other on their porch in the morning sunlight, the ring on Carl's finger catching the light, their future stretching out ahead of them, bright with possibility. When? Carl asked eventually. Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next year, whenever feels right. What about this fall? October, maybe? The leaves will be beautiful here. October sounds perfect, Jonathan said. Our first autumn in our new home. Our first autumn as an engaged couple. Our first autumn of forever. Carl looked at the ring on his finger, then at Jonathan's face, then at their house and their porch and their life spread out around them like a promise kept. I never thought I'd get this, he said quietly. A love like this, a life like this, someone who chose me the way you chose me. You didn't get it, Jonathan said softly. We built it, together, out of friendship and patience and the courage to be honest about what we wanted. And now we get to keep building it for the rest of our lives. And Carl kissed him again, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, their new hometown was coming to life, neighbors heading to work, children walking to school, the ordinary magic of a life well lived unfolding in all directions. So, Carl said eventually, settling back into his chair, but keeping hold of Jonathan's hand, tell me about this book you're writing. Does the happily ever after include a proposal on a porch? Jonathan laughed. It does now. Good, Carl said, admiring the ring on his finger, admiring the man beside him, admiring the life they'd built together through patience and love and the simple courage to tell the truth. Because that's exactly how the best love stories should end. With a beginning, Jonathan said. With a beginning, Carl agreed. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky over their new home, their new life, their new beginning, Carl Cooper and Jonathan Jackson sat on their porch and planned their wedding, their future, their forever, with the kind of joy that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be with exactly the person you're supposed to be with. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories, Carl thought, are the ones that catch you completely off guard, the ones that grow slowly out of friendship and trust, and the gradual recognition that the person you've been looking for has been right there beside you all along. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get brave enough to reach for what you want before it's too late. Sometimes you get your happily ever after.